I'm sure we've all had the experience, or many of us have had the experience of waking up in the morning, going through our morning routine, brushing our teeth, taking a shower, for some out there, styling our hair, checking in on the news, then grabbing whatever we need and getting in our cars to head out for the day. Next thing we know, we're parking our cars and walking into our office or wherever we need to be, left with one big question: what happened to the drive over? If you've experienced this before, you are not alone. Neuroscientist David Eagleman explains that this phenomenon results specifically from familiarity. He writes, quote, "The more familiar the world becomes, the less information your brain writes down, and the more quickly time seems to pass," end quote. So the more we make those same turns and get stuck at those same stoplights on the way to work, the less brain power we require to process that car ride, and subsequently the less of it we remember. This is also likely the reason why time seems to move faster as we age, because the world becomes more and more familiar. Just this past Sunday, my niece, who in my mind is still my baby niece, turned 13 years old, and that led me to pause and consider what many of us do: where did the time go? The revolving circle game of life is likely nothing new. Yet our modern age has certainly exacerbated it. As Rebecca Solnit writes in her book from 2000, Wanderlust, "The mind, like the feet, works at about 3 miles an hour. If this is so, then modern life is moving faster than the speed of thought or thoughtfulness." Now, much has been said and written about how we can break free from this monotony of everyday life, moving from one milestone to the next until we look up and realize that decades have passed. Mindfulness techniques have become more and more popular, encouraging us to keep our attention in the present, letting our thoughts of the future and the past wash away like the tide. In its early popularity, mindfulness techniques have encouraged us to hone in on one specific task or thought. But more recently, a new breed of techniques have risen to the surface, ones that have deep roots in the history of human consciousness. One such technique asks us not to focus our attention on one task or one moment, but rather to allow our minds and even our bodies and our souls to simply wander, without specific direction, without assigned task, but to allow ourselves to follow where our attention guides us. In her 2021 book entitled Rooted, Leanda Lynn Haupt explains that, quote, "The root of the word wander lies in the Old English wandrian, to wend, to wind. Wandering is goalless, aimless, directionless, the motion of our steps guided not by a set path or route, but by the inclination of our spirit," end quote. Wandering is innate to human nature. If you don't believe me, come here to Temple and see the little ones at the BKL ELC summer program playing in the courtyard each day. Unlike us adults, they do not move through time and space with the aim of doing or achieving or completing tasks. They simply go where their heart and their mind leads them. It is through curiosity and wandering that they discover newness, new smells, new textures, and perhaps some new reactions from their wonderful teachers. This is also what allows their creativity to blossom, to see shapes in clouds or drawings that few adults with our familiar and jaded perspectives will see. But wandering should not just be for them. Yes, it is true. With age comes responsibility. There are appointments to make, bills to pay, obligations to fulfill. To fall into the daily routine of life is not a bad thing in and of itself. The most well-worn paths are often the safest and the easiest. But I fear that too often we forget the beauty and even the holiness of wandering, seeing it as detracting from that most venerated characteristic of modern times, productivity. But the reality is that it is not a zero-sum game, a zero-sum proposition. In fact, our periodic meanderings, whether physical, mental, or spiritual, can actually supplement and enrich our day-to-day lives. As Lynn Haupt puts it, quote, "We gather ourselves for the time when we must go forward, a time indeed that leavens our wandering time. But our wanderings feed rather than distract from the sources of our resilience and our resistance. In breaking away from established paths, we are able to carve new ones, allowing the unfamiliar to open us up to new possibilities." Now, if New Age mindfulness techniques are not quite your thing, I would invite you to look at the central role of wandering in Jewish tradition. As I mentioned earlier, in Jewish time, we have just begun the book of Numbers, Sefer Bamidbar, a book that centers on the Israelites' wanderings in the wilderness. The Haftarah for this week's Torah portion, which I feel like I should say is actually my bar mitzvah portion. The Haftarah tells the story of Manoach and his unnamed wife in the book of Judges, and the events that lead to the birth of their son, who you might have heard of, named Samson. The story begins with an angel appearing to Manoach's wife, declaring that she will become pregnant with her first child. She runs to tell her husband, and Manoach doesn't believe her. Manoach is not really depicted as the brightest bulb in the pack. So Manoach prays to God for the angel to appear again, and then we read, God heeded Manoach's plea, and the angel of God came to the woman again. She was sitting in the field, and her husband Manoach was not with her. The woman ran in haste to tell her husband. She said to him, "The man who came before me has just appeared to me." Eventually, Manoach had to see it for himself, but the part that strikes me is not that an angel appears to this woman. It is where this angel appears. She was sitting in the field. It does not say she was working in the field, that she was filing taxes in the field, that she was texting in the field. No. It simply says that she was in the field. What was she doing? Maybe nothing. Simply wandering and allowing the universe to speak to her as it had before. This is far from the only story in our sacred texts where aimless wandering leads to mystical encounters. Isaac was meandering in the field when he first saw Rebekah. Jacob was wandering along the Jabbok River when he wrestles with God. Moses happens upon the burning bush where? After he, quote, drove the flock into the wilderness and came to the mountain of God. So it is through our wandering, not our constant doing, that we can experience new and holy moments. Giving ourselves permission to wander is not an easy thing. Our sense of identity and even self-worth is so often tied to what we do and what we accomplish. But this is why we have holidays, the most obvious of which comes to us each and every week to remind us that, in the words of one of our teachers here at Temple Israel, who shared this earlier this week, Sally Rosenberg, we are not human doings, we are human beings. So on this Shabbat, even just this Shabbat, I hope that all of us can find an opportunity to simply wander, to take a walking trail we've never taken before, to follow the birds to see where they nest, to follow those intentions of our heart that may lead to somewhere or to nowhere, or to a nowhere that becomes a somewhere just by us being there. Trust me, our busy lives and schedules will still be there when we return. But for this day, let us just wander. Shabbat Shalom.